A defeat sometimes is not the end of the story. It is the brutal preface to a darker chapter yet unwritten. What if November 8, 1923, which should have marked the definitive end of Adolf Hitler's political career, was actually his strategic rebirth? As the shots echoed in the streets of Munich and a leader's ambitions fell to the ground in a pool of blood, a decisive thought began to form in Hitler's mind. He understood that the force of the bullet had failed. On this day, the Beer Hall Putsch, Golpe de Munich, did not just change the future of Germany, it fundamentally rewrote the methodology of tyranny. It was the cruel lesson that transformed a failed street agitator into a ruthless, legalistic political strategist. This initial failure, which resulted in the death of Igor 16, Nazi supporters and Hitler's own imprisonment, ironically bought him the necessary time to craft his true weapon, the ideological blueprint laid out in his book, Mein Kampf. The path to the greatest human catastrophe was paved by this calculated failure. On November 8th, the Beer Hall Putsch, Golpe de Munich, marked, "Today, there's history." Believing the moment was ripe to overthrow the Weimar Republic, Adolf Hitler and his followers marched in Munich, primed for revolution. But the revolution never came. Instead, they met a wall of resistance and the sharp crack of reality. The confrontation at the Feldherrenhalle was quick, brutal, and utterly failed. 20 people died, 16 Hitler loyalists and 4 police officers, the immediate price paid for challenging the state by force. The coup was crushed in less than 24 hours. Hitler, a fugitive, was captured 2 days later, utterly humiliated. His attempt to mimic Mussolini's March on Rome had dissolved on the wet pavement of an indifferent Bavaria. To the world, the Beer Hall Putsch was a comedic footnote, the pathetic end of a street agitator. But this is where the historical narrative pivots. This incarceration was not a final defeat, but a forced strategic retreat. The prison cell was, in reality, an echo chamber. If armed violence failed, he realized, the only way to seize power would be to use the very tools of democracy, turning the Republic's institutions against itself. It was inside Landsberg prison that Hitler picked up a pen, not a rifle, and began writing the manifesto that would codify his hatred and pave his future path. Mein Kampf. What looked like the termination of his career was the birth of his master plan. What he learned in Landsberg would change the destiny of the world. But before the architect could shape the future from his cell in Landsberg prison, there was the foundation of the plan, a moment of chaos and arrogance that, ironically, should have destroyed him completely. Germany in 1923 was a shattered nation. Hyperinflation had swallowed the middle class. A loaf of bread cost billions of marks. The humiliation of Versailles was a national cancer. Munich, the capital of Bavaria, had become the epicenter of this rage, teeming with paramilitary groups, the perfect breeding ground for the ambition of an agitator, Adolf Hitler. On the evening of November 8th, destiny was being served in liters at the Burger Bräukeller, Munich's vast beer hall. Thousands of citizens and the key leaders of the Bavarian government, Gustav von Kahr, Otto von Lossow, Hans von Seisser, were gathered. Around 8:30 p.m., the silence was shattered by the banging of doors. More than 600 men of the SA, stormtroopers, surrounded the venue. Hitler, clad in his trench coat, brandishing a pistol, climbed onto a table. The coup began with a shot fired into the ceiling, a primal scream. "The national revolution has begun!" He declared a new government and proclaimed the Weimar Republic dead. He managed to secure, under duress, the initial cooperation of the Bavarian leaders, promising the legendary Field Marshal Erich Ludendorff as the military head. It seemed like an immediate victory, a textbook successful putsch. But arrogance was blind. While Hitler briefly left the hall to resolve an external dispute, General Ludendorff, relying on military honor, allowed Kahr, Lossow, and Seisser to leave under the promise of loyalty, a promise that was worth less than an inflated mark. Once free, they immediately denounced the coup and mobilized loyal forces. The defeat was sealed the following morning. Hoping to gain popular support and force the government's hand, Hitler and Ludendorff led about 2,000 supporters on a march through the city center. As they approached the Feldherrnhalle, Munich's military pantheon, the procession met a police blockade. The confrontation was swift and brutal. In less than 1 minute, dozens of shots were fired. The toll was devastating. 16 Nazi party members and 4 police officers were killed. The violent maneuver, the plan to overthrow the government by brute force, collapsed in blood and shame. Ludendorff was detained immediately. Hitler was rescued by his wounded bodyguard and fled, temporarily disgraced, only to be arrested 2 days later. This was not the triumph he expected. It was the absolute end of the insurrectionary path. What history would record as a humiliating failure would, in reality, secure him time, a stage, and a pen. It was the failure that forced him to look not to the streets, but to the ballot box, fundamentally altering his path to power. The pen, however, only replaced the rifle because in 1923, the rifle was already loaded with despair, and the political stage was flooded with chaos. To understand why Hitler, an obscure Austrian corporal, believed he could seize control of a sovereign state by holding 3 regional officials at gunpoint in a beer hall, we must step back into the terrifying reality of the Weimar Republic in its infancy. 1923 was not just a year, it was the climax of German post-war disintegration. Born from defeat, the Weimar Republic was viewed by vast swathes of the population not as a democracy but as a shameful imposition by the Allies. The weight of the Versailles Treaty, demanding 132 billion gold marks in reparations, fed the poisonous narrative that Germany had been stabbed in the back, Dolch dos Legende, by its own socialist and liberal politicians. This myth created a moral license for violence against the state. But the most immediate debilitating poison was economic. Hyperinflation. It is difficult for us today to grasp the scale of this collapse. The savings of generations evaporated overnight. People literally burned Reichsmarks for heat, finding the paper cheaper than wood. In January 1923, a loaf of bread cost 250 marks. By November, the month of the Putsch, that same loaf cost an astonishing 200 billion marks. Wages were paid in wheelbarrows full of paper money, which lost value before the recipient could reach the market. The currency had ceased to be a medium of exchange and had become a punchline. This economic anarchy did more to destabilize the young German democracy than any single political party could have. The final spark was geopolitical. In January 1923, when Germany defaulted on reparations, France and Belgium occupied the Ruhr Valley, the industrial heartland of the nation. This action, perceived as a gross violation of German sovereignty, triggered passive resistance which the Weimar government supported by printing even more money, thus accelerating the hyperinflationary spiral to its climax. Munich, the capital of Bavaria, became the incubator of this volatile mix of economic desperation and ultra-nationalist fury. Veterans, disillusioned officers, and anti-democratic extremists found refuge and a powerful platform in the city's beer halls. It was here that Adolf Hitler, leveraging his powerful, if simplistic, oratory, transformed the small German Workers' Party into the burgeoning Nazi Party, utilizing the symbol of the swastika to offer an identity to the dispossessed. Hitler's motivation for the putsch was rooted in both contempt and ambition. He saw the Republic as illegitimate and weak, and the chaos of the Ruhr crisis as the perfect moment for a decisive blow. He was deeply influenced by Benito Mussolini's successful march on Rome in 1922, believing that a similar show of force, a march from Munich to Berlin, would instantly crumble the central government. The key element, the perceived guarantee of success, was the presence of General Erich Ludendorff, the symbolic figurehead of Germany's past military glories and a fierce proponent of the stab-in-the-back myth. Hitler believed that the mere involvement of this military legend would instantly sway the Bavarian army and police to their side. It was a failure of strategic realism, relying on iconography rather than actual institutional support. They had the venue, the Burgerbräukeller, a large beer hall perfect for gathering mass support. They had the immediate goal, to capture Bavarian political leaders Gustav von Kahr, Otto von Lossow, and Hans Ritter von Zeisser. And they had the unwavering belief that their cause was just, given the economic ruin engulfing the nation. Yet, they profoundly misjudged the loyalties of the old establishment and the reluctance of the military brass to risk civil war for a fringe movement. What ensued was a chaotic, almost comedic failure of execution, which ended not in a heroic march, but in a desperate scuffle on the Odeonsplatz. This act of despair, born from economic collapse and lingering wartime resentment, seemed like the definitive end of Hitler's political career. He was arrested, tried, and imprisoned. But the failure of November 8, 1923, ironically provided the greatest lesson: that power cannot be seized through a single, reckless gunshot to the ceiling, but through the patient, legal conquest of the levers of fear and law. The defeat had inadvertently shown Hitler the way to victory, setting the stage for his transformation from revolutionary agitator to strategic politician. The Landsberg prison, far from being a punishment, became the strangest of strategic retreats. Hitler was sentenced to 5 years, but due to sympathetic judges and political maneuvers, he served only 9 months. This was not incarceration, it was a sabbatical. The trial itself, thanks to sensationalist press coverage and a biased judicial system, transformed Hitler from a regional agitator into a national figure, a martyr of the nationalist cause. But the true turning point was the manuscript dictated to Rudolf Hess behind those cold walls, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. This wasn't merely a political manifesto, it was the strategic blueprint for seizing power legally. The key lesson learned on November 9, 1923, was simple and brutal. Violent insurrection would fail against the established state forces of the Weimar Republic. The way to conquer Germany was not through the barrel of a gun, but through the ballot box. After his release in late 1924, Hitler relaunched the Nazi Party, adhering strictly to the legal route. Initially, the party remained fringe. In the 1928 Reichstag elections, they secured only 2.6% of the national vote. Then came the economic collapse of 1929, the Great Depression, which tore the social and political fabric of Germany apart. This crisis was the fuel Hitler needed. The strategic pivot of 1923 was now paying dividends. The party's electoral results skyrocketed, 18.3% in 1930, fueled by widespread desperation. By July 1932, the Nazis were the largest party in the Reichstag, achieving 37.3% of the vote. The profound, chilling irony of the Beer Hall Putsch is this: the failed coup gave Hitler the space, the 9 months, to re-engineer his entire method. The very democratic institutions he sought to overthrow violently were the ones he successfully manipulated to establish his dictatorship. The 8th of November wasn't the day Germany lost the war. It was the day it learned the most efficient, subtle way to invite catastrophe. Had the putsch succeeded in 1923, it might have been confined to a regional military uprising, eventually crushed. The failure, conversely, handed Hitler the national platform, the martyr status, and the strategic roadmap that led, 10 years later, to absolute power and the eventual deaths of millions. The price of that one failed uprising was paid in blood across the entire globe. And that is the terrible, enduring lesson of Munich. The greatest threats to democracy often masquerade under the guise of legal political legitimacy, weaponizing the very freedoms designed to protect society. When the violent revolutionary fails, beware the political architect who emerges in his place. The subsequent trial, viewed by Hitler not as a setback but as a stage, became the true turning point of his career. It was in Landsberg prison, far from the chaotic streets and the failed euphoria, that the strategic metamorphosis occurred. The bloody failure in Munich taught Hitler that the revolution would not come through arms, but through the ballot box. It was there, writing Mein Kampf, that he systematized an ideology designed to legally infiltrate the state, rather than overthrow it. This was the triumph of defeat. The loss of 1923 forced the future dictator to adopt the democratic path, a facade of legitimacy that would deceive the conservative elite of the Weimar Republic and pave his way to the chancellery 10 years later. Note the contrast. In 1928, the Nazi Party held only 2.6% of the votes in the Reichstag, but by 1932, they were the largest party, commanding 37%. The dark lesson of November 8th is that failure can be the most powerful of tools. Hitler lost the battle of a single day only to learn how to win the war of a decade, proving that the most dangerous threat to democracy is the one that learns to use its own rules against it. This was just one of the days that shaped our world. Tomorrow, we will publish another landmark historical event. To make sure you don't miss it, subscribe now to The Day That Changed Everything and activate notifications. What other day would you like to see featured here? Comment below.